My dad just had a fit. He said, "You are not going to become an artist. I'm not going to have an artist in this family. Artists don't make any money. You're never going to be able to support yourself."
What is Star Wars? A fairy tale?
Roger, roger.
An adventure fantasy?
Roger, roger.
A sci-fi epic?
Roger, roger.
A series about space wizards intended for children?
No.
George Lucas created the franchise based on his fondness for old serialized adventures and personal experiences. Let's explore the latter. Bear with me as I set the stage. George Lucas Jr. had a complicated relationship with his father. As a child, he perceived a distance between himself and George Sr. His father owned a stationery store in Modesto, California, and as a conscientious provider, dedicated himself to his business. He wasn't absent, but he viewed his role as the traditional breadwinner. George's mother, older sisters, and nanny were caregivers, and George Jr. began to feel the weight of expectations as he matured. In adolescence, his father's plans conflicted with his own. George Sr. assumed his only son would succeed him in the business, but George Jr. lacked focus. He loved fast cars, rock and roll, and comic books, and, well, not much beyond them. However, his lackluster academic performance wasn't a problem unless he detoured from his father's plans, which in the end is exactly what happened. The ensuing discord affected Star Wars. The original and prequel trilogies reflect conflict within Lucas's family and countless other families across the world. Relationships between parents and children are complex, and they make a lasting impact. Thank you for your patience. Let's examine the influence of those personal experiences on Star Wars. Welcome to Galactic Initiative. I'm your host, Jeff. Please like and subscribe. My channel covers all things Star Wars. Darth Vader was unaware of Luke until his son reached adolescence. George Jr. felt he was invisible to his father until his teenage years. Vader insisted Luke join him to rule the galaxy, following the realization of his parentage and a crucible to determine the boy's worthiness. Their duel in The Empire Strikes Back began as a test, which Luke passed, and ended with an ultimatum: join or die. In the Lucas household, join or you're dead to me. Once Luke battled his father, despite his defeat, he was ready to fulfill his destiny. Standing up to George Sr. allowed George Jr. to prove himself at film school in Los Angeles. Through his rejection of his father's plans, he gained confidence. He would ultimately blaze a different trail and achieve self-actualization rather than taking the path of least resistance for his father's approval. George Sr. eventually expressed support, and the two reconciled. According to George Jr., "My father lived to see me finally go from a worthless, as he would call late bloomer, to actually being successful. I gave him the one thing every parent wants, to have your kid be safe and able to take care of himself." Vader lived to see Luke avoid his father's mistakes and become a Jedi. Anakin Skywalker returned. A father's love, manifested as pride and protectiveness, broke the dark side's hold and gave the needed strength for atonement. Consider the final exchange between characters. Vader's helmet, a mask for fear and intimidation, was removed at his request. His voice, once terrifying, grew soft. The face of an old man, full of compassion and vulnerability, appeared.
"Now, go, my son. Leave me."
No, you're coming with me. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
You already have. Luke, you were right. You were right about me.
The prequels don't contain overt personal references like the original trilogy, yet they have meaning for George Jr. Anakin's fall to the dark side might signify George Sr.'s commitment to business over his wife and children. Anakin's fear of inadequacy as a guardian or protector leads him away from his family. Darth Sidious tricks him into sacrificing his freedom using the promise of his wife's safety and greater power, which can be interpreted as George Sr.'s financial stability and social standing. Anakin ended up broken and alone in the way George Jr., as a teenager, viewed his father. Like Anakin, George Sr. made obsessive mistakes that took decades to undo. He seemed to prioritize the stationery store and money ahead of everything else. I can relate. My father was similar to George Jr.'s father. He viewed himself as a breadwinner. He rarely voiced goodwill or affection. He wasn't loquacious, compassionate, or vulnerable. He was stoic because he wanted to instill work ethic and fortitude. He viewed the world as an unforgiving arena, and he wanted his sons to develop coping skills and be productive. He was flawed in many, many ways, but he loved me in his fashion. I am grateful to him for challenging me. We reconciled our differences when he retired. For too long, his career dominated his life and defined his self-worth. After leaving his profession, he recognized the importance of family and legacy. It's never too late, Anakin. As I said earlier, relationships between parents and children are complicated. One reason for Star Wars' universal appeal is its exploration of such complexity. I believe people of all ages across the planet relate to Luke's initial defeat and ultimate victory against his father, and his father's long overdue appreciation of him. Redemption, or atonement, is a theme of George Lucas's trilogies. Thank you for watching. Explore the channel for other interesting Star Wars videos.
Galactic Initiative is not authorized or endorsed by Lucasfilm Limited. The name Star Wars and all related materials are registered trademarks of Lucasfilm Limited, a subsidiary of the Walt Disney Company, all rights reserved. Galactic Initiative is a registered trademark, and other product and company names are trademarks of their respective holders. Use does not imply affiliation or endorsement.